Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome in. Alyssa Orange alongside Mike Irwin, ready for another edition of Ask Mike, and I've been promised that this is going to be the best one yet. Got a lot of good questions today.
Yeah, we do.
All right, here we go. Let's get it started. Question number one, of course, is not necessarily a question, but just a weekly COVID update.
Yeah, I'm a little bit frustrated because we don't have anything new numbers-wise from Arkansas. The last time we heard anything was, 2 weeks ago. Hunter Yurchek said that I think there was one active case. I'm assuming that if that had gone up, we might know a little bit. Overall, the number, though, the silence part is good, I think, because you're not hearing what we heard a few weeks ago about all these cases. You're hearing a lot of nothing, or like over the weekend, USC, which is sitting there right there in the middle of Los Angeles, which is a spike area where they've had a spike in COVID cases among the general public, and they tested everybody, all their athletes, all their coaches, all their staff members. And I'm shocked, but they had nobody positive. So that kind of stuff is good news to report. Hopefully we'll get another Zoom with Hunter pretty soon and find out if he's still talking about something like that. But that's a good part. There is a little bit of a negative, though, and we need to talk about it. And that is, remember back a few weeks ago when we were all saying that, and we got this from the SEC and from all of the various ADs, that college football would be looking at professional sports because they're opening up first. So if they don't have any problems, maybe it's more likely we could do this. Well, the first weekend of Major League Baseball is okay, sort of, but Miami, I don't know what happened up there. Some people say they had some guys that they knew were positive before the game and they went and played anyway. Anyway, they're up there in Philadelphia now kind of stuck because they got these 3 guys that tested positive, and they've got a game today in Miami against the Orioles, and I guess they had to cancel that.
They have. And their number, by the way, went up to 11 with 2 coaches.
And look, that's a hot spot. Miami's a bad place. But I don't know what's going to happen with them. It may be that they don't play for a while, or as Jason Carroll of our staff pointed out, that's why you have 60 guys on the roster. You just put other people out there and quarantine the ones that have been exposed. So I'm not sure with that. If something like that happened with college, it clearly would be an issue, but it hasn't so far. So all of that is good. And then there's this new bit of information, which I think came the other day, and that is, maybe it was Friday, when Oklahoma announced that they had asked for and gotten permission from the NCAA to move their season opener up a week. So that would be that week, that last week in August. And that got interpreted in a lot of different ways. Some people said, hey, you know what that means is they could be looking at playing a full season, because if you can play a game that early, why can't you, if your regular season starts a week after that, why would you have to start canceling games and moving people back into mid-September or October? But then other people, and Oklahoma's explanation for it was, this will create a gap in our schedule where we can make adjustments. And I think what they're worried about is some of these mid-majors are just jumping up and announcing they're done for this year. They're not playing. And I think a lot of these schools are nervous about suddenly ending up with a mid-major that they had on the schedule, and now it's not there, and what do we do about it? And so maybe they want to try to have time to figure out what they're going to do if they have a hole in their schedule. I'm not real sure what any of this means, and you've pointed out it also could be the NCAA could come back in 2 or 3 weeks and say, hey, we're not letting you do that. So it's not written in stone that OU is going to do this, but being Mr. Positive that I am about this, I'm going to assume that it means that they kind of look at this and say, you know, it might not hurt to open up that early.
You do want to spread things out. I think, and that's why when you look at these conferences that want to do the conference only +1, you play 10 games on a 13-week schedule. That gives you 3 open weekends to move games around if you need to.
If you need to. And then, you know, obviously this doesn't mean anything, because if the COVID caseload or spikes or whatever, if it stays what it is now, they could still come back and say, hey, it didn't get any better. We're going to move things back. And then you keep moving things back, hoping that sooner or later, there is some indication that it's going down a little bit in Texas. The deaths are up in South Texas, but the total numbers are down. And you just got to sit here and hope that across the South, where all this is happening, and all the way over into California, Arizona, that eventually, within a few weeks, you're going to get a drop-off, and it's going to look like what happened up in New York when they had the serious issues, and that it eventually peaked and went down, and it's been pretty low there ever since.
Going back to Major League Baseball, it's interesting, because they did the schedule and set it up to where there are pockets. There aren't teams in LA going cross country, there are pockets, and so there were some domino effects with that Miami-Philly game. So Miami's game with the Orioles today canceled, Philly's game today canceled as well. But everyone else is getting ready to play. And so I wonder, as you look at, as college athletics does this too, can you have pockets to where, if we got to shut down this pocket, but we still have 3 more pockets that are able to play.
And
we only
that may
need to just
be
shut down
what
one.
they end up deciding to do. We'll see.
It'll be interesting. All right, now to our first question from our Hogville members. Lanny says, how do you feel about only playing conference football games with a rebuilding team? Coach Pittman was dealt a hand from the bottom.
Yeah, that is a bit of an issue because obviously before this COVID thing hit and we're sitting back there in January and February and we're speculating, you're looking at, well, maybe you win the Nevada game. You probably don't beat Notre Dame, but you got a couple of other conference games you can win. And then if you win an SEC game or 2, then you got 5 wins and it looks a lot better. Well, now you're looking at if you look at only SEC games, then it becomes more problematic. But here's what I continue to say about this. I don't think Arkansas's fans are stupid. I think they understand some of the problems of the last 2 years. And I think even if it's an SEC-only schedule, you're going to see fans understand what we're really looking for is for this team to play better, be more competitive, not do some of the stupid things. They don't want to see the dopey special teams mistakes. Yeah. They don't want to see. What I thought was strange about the Chad Morris era was that defense just periodically didn't show up. Sometimes they usually played well against A&M for some reason. But then there were other games in which they just did, like Western Kentucky, when they just looked like they weren't even on the field. So if you don't have stuff like that, and if you don't have this dopey quarterback carousel going on, which just looked like mass insanity, you put a starter in there and he progresses and they show some improvement. Even if you're losing SEC games to teams like Alabama and LSU, if you're playing better, I think they'll be happy. The
one positive about only playing conference games, you can't lose non-conference games.
That's true.
That is improvement from a year ago.
That was embarrassing.
All right, here we go. Muskegee Hog fan says, it has been rumored that several teams around the country are seeking games with previously unscheduled opponents to potentially fill in their schedules that have been changed due to unanticipated cancellations. What about Arkansas?
Well, this is what we were talking about earlier, and some teams have already had that, where you have a team on your schedule, a mid-major, they've already announced they're not playing. What do you do about that? Nobody that Arkansas is playing so far has said that. You've got your conference games, and right up front you got Nevada. So they haven't said, hey, we're not coming. Yeah. So we don't know what's going to happen there, but as of right now, that's not really. I do believe Hunter Yurachek has a plan for everything. Yeah. I know he hasn't shared that type of a plan with us. The next time he Zooms, I'll try to remember. We need to remember to ask him that. If he's got a plan for that, but he's generally said he's got a plan for just about everything. But right now, it doesn't appear to be necessary.
I think Hunter's got lots of plans.
Lots of plans.
He's ready to go. All right. Hog says SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey seems pretty negative when discussing fall football possibilities compared to the ads I've heard from around the SEC, compared to the ADs I've heard around the SEC. Who has the real power to make the call, Sankey or school administrators?
Well, I do believe the SEC does have the power to make that call, but I think it's a good question, and it's something I would agree with. He has been more negative than, and I don't follow what the other ADs have been saying, but Hunter Yurachek has been much more positive in the comments he's made than Sankey has. And I don't think it was a coincidence. I don't know how long ago it was, a couple of weeks ago maybe, when Hunter Yurachek said, looking back, it was probably a mistake to cancel college baseball so quickly. They could have played longer and figured out a way to make it happen. I took that as a shot at Sankey, because that's how it happened. The league went, okay, we're canceling all this stuff. So I gotta believe, we're not in those meetings, we don't know what's said, but here's what I would say. We know the SEC. It's not like the rest of college athletics. This is football crazy territory in the SEC. That's one of the reasons Frank Broyles wanted Arkansas in the SEC, because football comes first in the SEC. Now, why does it come first? Well, first of all, it generates all kinds of money for businesses, for the schools, and it's not just the athletic department that's going to be hurt if you don't play football. You got businesses all across the South, right here in Fayetteville and all these other schools that are going to be really hurt if you don't have a college football season. Now, what if there's no fans? Well, it's still a problem, but if you've got games, guess what happens? People go out to these restaurants and places that have the games on TV, and so they still get a benefit from that. So I just don't think the SEC, the bottom line, I don't think these ADs are going to let this happen. If Sankey sits up there and says, oh, I don't think we should do this, I think they'll overrule him. Now, there could be a revolt. They could just say, you're out. We want a better commissioner. Probably won't come to that. There's one other possibility, and I want to discuss that.
Okay.
And that is Sankey is just basically saying what he's saying to scare the average fan throughout the South where we've had these test positives all over the place and try to
scare them into paying attention.
Into wearing the mask and being safe and don't go out to bars and doing all this stuff or you won't have football.
Yeah.
He could be doing that.
Yeah.
And when he really, behind the scenes, knows we're going to figure out a way to play.
That's possible. All right, here we go. Continuing on, we have made a request that Coach Pittman give us an update on the walkthrough practices. Oh, wait. I keep reading the answers. I'm sorry.
Don't read the answers.
I know. Any update from football practice or when we will hear from Coach Pittman again? There doesn't seem to be much info coming out. I apologize
That's
for
all right.
stealing
And let me
answer.
just explain that those answers are written down because this program also goes on the internet.
Yeah.
And there are people that don't want to sit and watch this program because it lasts about 30 minutes and they'd rather just read the answers really quickly.
Yeah.
So I kind of provide a general rough rough,
a
script,
shortened version
of what I say.
Yeah.
And so it has to be down there, and Alyssa has to read the questions, and sometimes I put.
Sometimes I just read the wrong thing. You can't even see it, but it's
I
like
put
a lot.
Q&A on
you
here,
do,
but you can. Maybe we should just mark through and different marks.
I know. I need to highlight.
Yeah.
I need to be more prepared.
We'll
You're right.
do that.
I'll be better next week.
We're learning this as we go. Okay, so what was the question again?
Here we go. Here's the question one more time. And I apologize. I also haven't been given our shout outs to our question and answers. WooPig88 asks, any update from football practice or when we will hear from Coach Pittman again? There doesn't seem to be much info coming out.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. We haven't had a lot of stuff from either Hunter Yurachek, and in this case, we haven't heard from Sam Pittman since they've started this. Now, we put in a request since it started last Friday, I think, to ask him, hey, how's this going? Now, I guess today is just the second one, but the athletic department here has been very good about giving us what we need. Zoom interviews with coaches, players, AD, head coach, and all of that. So I got to assume within a few days, Sam Pittman will be back and he will be explaining how this is going and let us know. And when that happens, we'll let you know and we'll put it up and everyone can see it.
Exactly. All right. Question. Excuse me. Hashtag hammer down. It's an interesting choice of username. Says there has been a lot of talk about a conference-only schedule. Would it be better for Arkansas to cancel the season than to have to play an SEC-only
See, that sounds
schedule?
like a question Chad Morris might ask.
That's a Chad Morris incentive kind of question for sure.
I would say absolutely not.
No.
You can't have that kind of defeatist attitude. Look, even no season, as I've explained before, would be a disaster. So let's say even if the season doesn't go and you have to, as well as you want, and you have to play these conference games and you don't have the non-conference games, here's what happens is you still have a chance to win a couple of conference games, maybe more than that, who knows. But again, we get back to that whole thing I talked about, showing improvement. And, it's just, fans understand what's going on right now. It's like when you go into a restaurant right now. What happens? You don't have the full menu, and sometimes they don't have certain things that you want, but you don't sit there and yell at the waiter. You know this is an unusual situation, and you're going to kind of deal with it because everybody's having to deal with it. Well, I look at the season that way. Just because you don't have these non-conference games and everything's conference, and so maybe you lose most of those games. I don't think people just go, oh, this stinks, let's just don't play at all. Maybe a few do because there's people out there that think just about anything you can think of. But I got to believe the average fan still wants to see the season played, even if there's no non-conference games and if every game's a conference game.
What they say, go with the flow. And there's another reason why you want to play games, even if you just play a few games and no games, and it's this.
Yeah.
They will make money on those games, and if you're Hunter Yurachek, you need some kind of revenue coming in from football, regardless of how small, than none at all.
Absolutely.
All right. Fuzzy Hog wants to know, with no fans in the stands, do you think it will help the Razorbacks with away games?
Okay, every once in a while we get a question that nobody has ever thought of before. We get a lot of repeat questions. This is one I haven't gotten from anybody yet, and it's one hell of a question. Now, I do think it will help. It would help maybe, your initial thinking would be, gee, why couldn't they be playing LSU on the road this year, Alabama on the road this year? It might really help there. Well, yeah, that's true. But there are some games right off the bat, September 19th. You know what happened if the Nevada game gets canceled and they don't play the Notre Dame game and you push the season back? That Mississippi State game on the 19th, travel to Mississippi, that might be the first game. Now, look at Mississippi State. They got a brand new coaching staff, just like Arkansas, and their offensive line is young. And Mike Leach has the kind of offense where you need an offensive line. So that game is already winnable in my mind. Now, some people might look at Mississippi State and say, well, that's not a big environment anyway. If you say that, you've never been there. It is an awesome environment. It's very tough. They've got a three-quarters type
All you have
stadium.
to say is cowbell.
Yeah,
like
the cowbells make a big difference. But their fans are enthusiastic. They've got one open end of the stadium, but they've got a huge multi-story building there that blocks the sound. So it's like the old Broyles Center, but taller. And so it's loud in there. So you take that out of the equation and make it a very quiet game, I think that's enough to put that game over the top. Now, let's talk about Missouri, because that game is supposed to be played, what, in Kansas City?
Yeah, at Arrowhead Stadium.
Now, I don't know what's going to happen with that. They may say, well, since there's nobody here, we don't want to do that. Just play it at your place or whatever. But either way, Missouri is another winnable game. Another team with a new coaching staff and some talent issues, some experience issues. And then so you take the home crowd out of the equation for that game. That too might be something that puts that game over the top for Arkansas. And then we look at other games. I look at Auburn. Auburn's a very tough place to play. So you take if there's no crowd at all there, that becomes like a dead place. And then you've got, oh, we're getting to play Chad Morris again, and then you got all these Hog fans that want to watch on TV and see Gus get beat. Who knows? They might pull off an upset there. Then you look at the A&M game. What's going to happen there? Because now again,
hey, I'll take Kyle Field or AT&T Stadium with no Aggie fans.
That's what's a little weird here. I know that we talked last week about A&M's AD wanting them to play that game at A&M this year. And as you pointed out, he's probably talking about that's one less travel game for them.
Yeah.
But think about it. If he agrees, okay, if you let us play this game at A&M, we'll return to Fayetteville the next year. Who gets hosed on that deal? They do, because next year you're going to have a full stadium, and everybody wants to come out and watch the Aggies. Yeah. So that would be a good trade-off, in my opinion. Now, if they decide to play it in Jerry World, that's probably a wash, because that game is generally about half and half anyway, and so now there's nobody there. Yeah. So I don't know that it gives Arkansas an advantage for that game.
All right. Parallax Pig wants to know, what do you think the protocol will be after a starter on a team tests positive after a game? Currently, is it a minimum of 10-day quarantine? Also, do you think that they will quarantine every player that was on the field with that player?
Okay, go back to what we talked about before, where the Marlins played these guys, knowing that that was a huge mistake. We're assuming they're going to test players probably the Friday before a Saturday game, and they'll know by game time if they test positive. I think it would be highly unusual for somebody to test negative on Friday and turn out to be positive on Saturday. I suppose technically it could happen, but I don't look for it to happen. But let's say it did happen. Let's say there was one guy. Here's what I would do. I don't know what they'll do, but here's what I would do. I would take those players that came into contact with that player that tested positive, and I would watch them and look for symptoms the next week to see if they're getting sick. And if they don't show any signs, if obviously they get sick, you immediately quarantine them. But if they don't show any signs, then you test them again on Friday. They've had enough time between when they were with this guy to acquire this virus and let it show up. And you test them again, and if they test negative, then to me they're okay. So I think there's a solution for this, and I don't think it has to be you just quarantine everybody.
Okay. All right, next question. Mike E. wants to know, has virtual attendance been brought up at all? You could pay a small amount and have your name added to the list for that game. At $10 a name, a fan base of 100,000 could give a cool $1 million to their team for every game.
Right now, I don't think that's being discussed at Arkansas because I know some people that are season ticket holders, and I know what they've told me, and this is what the athletic department is talking to them about. They're trying to figure out a way, and Hunter Yurachek mentioned this a long time ago, and I think they're still trying to do it. They're trying to figure out a way to take their 30,000 season ticket holders, that's how many they have, eliminate any one-game purchases, general admission tickets, take those 30,000, that's somewhat over a third of the stadium, and figure out a way to socially distance them around the stadium where they can show up to the games and be reasonably safe. Now, again, that's going to depend on what the caseload is like, you know, a month from now. But that's what they're looking at. So I don't think they focused on putting these cardboard things up that we see. But Major League Baseball is doing a version of that, and you know a lot about that.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us how that works?
So a lot of these teams are doing, and I'm a Dodgers fan, so I bought one for Finn and my dad, and it's a cardboard cutout, and you've seen them behind home plate.
Right.
And they sit at the seats all season long. So you pay a certain amount of money, and full disclosure, paid $150 for them to do that. They sit there, though, and you get to see them on TV. Then they're authenticated by the MLB when the season is over, and then they get mailed back to you. So it's a really cool, for me, it was a cool piece of history to say, hey, look, Finn, you were a cardboard cutout, you know, during COVID at Dodger Stadium. And as a Dodgers fan, easily would pay that. Would Razorback fans easily say, I want a cardboard cutout of me. If I'm going to watch TV, I can go, hey, there I am on the 45-yard line or something. And you pay, and the school gets a little bit of that revenue as well. So it would also be fun for fans to stay connected and to be involved a little bit more too. It's pretty neat what they're doing.
So as we get closer to this thing, if at some point a week or two out it looks like there's going to be no fans, I don't know how quickly they could do this, but they could start doing it and do it as the season goes along, and that could generate an additional amount of money. This would be beyond like $10. This is like $100, $150 to make the cutout. I don't know what that costs. And you stick it in there, and at the end they mail it back to you, and you got it certified that you were at the game.
Exactly.
It was just a cardboard cutout of you, and you can have that as a memento. It'd be cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be a really cool piece of history, which is why we went ahead and did it for Finn and my dad. All right, next question is from NC Hogg, and he wants to know, I know there is a lot of skepticism about fall football. I think it'll happen. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I've kind of addressed this as we've gone through this and in previous weeks. Again, I think we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of stuff that sounds negative. But I think the people that run these various athletic departments, and I got to believe even the administrators of the school, they understand what it would be like for a whole year without SEC football. Look, this is going to affect attendance. I really believe that. I mean, you may not understand this, but a lot of those kids that come up here from Central Arkansas, they don't come up here just because, oh, gee, I think I want to get out of town to go to school. You come up here because you're going to have big football games and basketball games and baseball games.
It's the reason I went to school where I went to school. I wanted to go to a big college environment like that.
I went to one junior college my first year with very limited athletics. It was terrible. And I didn't go to a school that had great athletics, North Texas State. It was pretty bad, really, honestly. But we still went to games and we had fun. If you got a school that in the SEC, you need to go to those games. So I think they understand this. I think they're going to figure out a way to make it happen. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to go back to this whole business of athletes 25 and under, if they are healthy, don't have underlying conditions, the chances of them getting really sick are low. I think they can also, I think we're already seeing this. They aren't talking about it, but there's a reason why there's fewer positive tests among players on these various teams than there were. And I think they may not have done the true cocoon that we've seen in professional sports, but I think they've done some things with these athletes to say, hey, don't go out and do this, don't go out and do that. I mean, I was watching TV this morning. You may know who this is. There's some NBA guy. He had a mask, and he tried to claim that was an old photo, but it was a selfie. He was at a bar or something, and he had the stupid mask on that showed that he was, you know, that it was a COVID mask from now. And so hopefully your college guys got a little more sense than that and don't do that. But I think there's ways of keeping these guys safe, and I think we're going to have a season. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah. All right, last question, and this should be a fun one. We're going to end with a non-COVID question.
Because we're tired of COVID.
To lighten things up, I know. Jules Winnifield wants to know, what is the loudest stadium moment you have ever experienced?
You know, I'd like to tell everybody that it was an Arkansas game, and over the years there have been many. Loud games in War Memorial, loud games in Fayetteville. But the truth is, the loudest, and I don't know if you were there that
I was.
night.
Me and Aaron Peters were in the press box.
Okay, well, I was down on the field.
Yeah.
And this was the 2015 Tennessee game.
Yeah.
And if you'll remember, that was the year in which Arkansas, they'd lose to was it Dayton? Somebody like that.
Toledo.
Toledo. They lost to Toledo. I get Dayton and Toledo mixed up. And then they lost that Texas Tech game at home to Mahomes. And so it's not looking good.
Yeah.
And then I think they lost to A&M, and then you go up to Tennessee, and it looks like the season's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
And what happens? Tennessee's got like 98,000 fans in that place. They're going bonkers. They run the opening kickoff back. There's nothing to get a fan base fired up than an opening kickoff run back. And then Arkansas got the ball back, and there was some kind of screw up, and the next thing you know, Tennessee scored again, so it's 14-0.
Yeah.
Now, I'm down on the field thinking, they're going to get killed in this game. It's going to be like 55-7 or something. This will be embarrassing. And it looked like the season was over. It was going to be terrible. It was going to be a Chad Morris type season. And then Brandon Allen, I will never forget this. He comes out, I think they started on maybe the 15 or 20. They were in a hole. It looked like more of the same. And he just threw a third down pass and completed it. Then they had a running play that got them another first down, and then they just started moving and moving. They went all the way down the field and scored. So now the crowd's not quite as nutty as it was. But then as the game progresses, Arkansas's playing better and better. And the next thing you know, they got the lead. Well, the bottom line is, in the third and especially the fourth quarter, that stadium went from being the loudest place I'd ever been in to dead quiet. People were leaving.
Yeah.
It was like nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I've always heard this thing where, you can create your own environment.
Yeah.
Brandon Allen and his teammates, and everybody talks about that Henry Heave later on the year at Ole Miss, and everybody remembers that. Nobody talks about this. That game turned that season around and made that season what it was, and because they were on the skids up until that day. It's a great story and how you can stop the damage. Every time I see Brandon Allen from here on out, that's what I'm going to think about. I'm going to think about that night, that game, and what he did, because it doesn't get a lot of publicity, but it was unbelievable.
Do you remember that was the game where there were some cheap shots on Brandon Allen that weren't called? And if you're watching back in the game, they kept cutting to his mom and his sister in the stands, and they're screaming at the umpire or referees. And that's what I remember about that Tennessee game, too, is Brandon took a lot of shots in that game and again, was able to do what he was able to do.
I thought about his career and how he started. I think the first time he played, what was that John L. Smith game against ULM?
That was before my time.
And Tyler Wilson got hurt. I think didn't come out for the second half, and they stuck Brandon out there. And Paul Petrino kept having him throw the ball, and they couldn't complete passes. And all of a sudden ULM comes back and wins, and everybody's saying, run the ball, run the ball. And then I think it was the next week he had to go up against Alabama. He's a true freshman, and he's got to face Alabama, and it was just awful. I mean, he went through the meat grinder, but that kid stuck it out, persevered. He's one of the toughest college football players I've ever seen. Yeah, absolutely. All right, this was fun. Great questions this week. We had a good time. Thanks for joining us on this week's Ask Mike. Again, if you have a question for Mike, and clearly nothing is off limits, head on over to honkville.net and the Ask Mike forum. For Mike Irwin, I'm Alyssa Orange. We'll see you next week.